In today's video, we show how to remove the primary Bank 2 catalytic converter on the Cayenne base model with the VR6 engine from 2008 to 2010. This is a totally new method that I have not seen in the forums before, which made my life much easier, and I'm excited to share it with you today. This method did not involve any dropping of the drive shaft or cutting, and at the end, I had a successfully removed Bank 2 catalytic converter directly out of the engine bay through the front. Replacing the catalytic converters is a final step to resolving the check engine codes for P0430 and P0431, efficiency below threshold, for resolving bad smells and improving mileage. You've tried everything else, such as cleaning the catalytic converters with fuel additives or replacing the oxygen sensors. On the 2003 to 2006 model years, both front catalytic converters go to a single exhaust pipe, so unfortunately on those years, you will have to disconnect both of them from the exhaust manifolds that go to the engine. Luckily, on the 2008 and up, these are independent exhaust pipes, and what you're about to see is a novel and easy method to get the Bank 2 primary catalytic converter out through the front of the engine bay. You might see a few things happen out of order, like me recommending to remove the oxygen sensors, then in the next clip, see them still attached. That's because I struggled through this process first, analyzed it, and jotted things down that would have made it much easier from the start, for the sake of saving everyone's time and making the video better. Remember Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince? This is me being Severus Snape, and this is my potions book that I'm giving to you. Let's get started. I purchased a Davico aftermarket replacement. Watch my bank video if you need help identifying which bank you need. Use the cylinder numbers, not the driver's side versus the passenger side on the website, to identify which part you need. It says it comes with gaskets, but it comes without, so plan accordingly by buying your own ahead of time. Parts numbers are listed now and in the description. To remove the primary catalytic converter for Bank 2, you'll need uninhibited access to the left side of the engine bay. Remove the engine bay covers. If you need help, see my engine cover video on my channel and linked in the description under chapters. Disconnect all oxygen sensors. I wish I had done this from the start because it makes life so much easier. Let's remove the oxygen sensor connectors from their housing and then disconnect all 4 oxygen sensors. To begin, snip any zip ties holding excess oxygen sensor wiring in place. For the removal from the housing part, for each catalytic converter, there's an upstream connector and a downstream connector. In other words, a sensor before the catalytic converter and after. The upstream and downstream sensors have different shaped connectors, so it's impossible to mix up upstream and downstream. Mixing them up between banks and where they go is a different story. Mine were different colors between the exhaust pipes. My Bank 1 connectors were black and Bank 2 were brown. Just to be safe, label them if you feel like you'll forget. Now for the removal part. Most importantly, if your oxygen sensor connectors are stuck, don't pry them out with a screwdriver, as we can see someone has already tried and done before. Use the trick, instead, that we learned from Ruslan's other video with shift cables, and grab them using pliers, and wiggle them out little by little. Just take one of these, get a good hold, wiggle it out. Oh man, that's just already tough, even from a little bit. And it pops right up. It's much simpler and easier this way, and there's much less danger to the other components. Now, let's get to the disconnecting portion. On the larger, squarer connections, press out on the tab towards the back of the connector, so that the tab presses back away.
Ow. I might want to wear gloves because that hurt. On the right hand side, it goes on like this. Put your fingernail on this, on the square thing here. Push down with your fingernail and pull it out. It'll only go back in one way. So the other ones too, like so. Push down with your thumb, pull, and pop right out. And that's how you disconnect your oxygen sensors.
All 4 oxygen sensors should be disconnected by this point. This will assist in the next step, where we remove the heat shield because now that all four are disconnected, we can move the wires out of the way to assist with heat shield removal when they get in the way. The heat shield has a bracket attached to it, and the whole thing is held in by force via clips at the top. First, remove the bracket via the two triple square bolts at the bottom, and a bolt that should not be missing at the top. Then, applying leverage against the other components, being careful not to damage anything, pull out one side of the heat shield and then the other, little by little.
There we go. Pulls out. I'm using from the front, I just got leverage here, making sure not to cut myself against stuff, and then it slides out. Left hand recommended glove, because it's scratched against something, but not too bad. Also getting leverage so that when it does break loose, I don't cut myself. There we go.
Here's more hindsight wisdom. It's better to remove all four oxygen sensors in one go because they stick out of the pipes and get in the way for all of the following steps if you don't remove them. I used an oxygen sensor removal tool that slides onto each sensor and lets you break it loose. Also, perfectly acceptable is a bent wrench with an open end, and many people DIY making this wrench. Once they break loose, the oxygen sensors are easy to twist out by hand.
Broke it loose. That was the setup to get it broken loose.
Remove all four and be sure to label them as you remove them. I wrote U1 and D1 to represent upstream bank 1 and downstream bank 1 with a marker, and did the same for labeling the bank 2 sensors. Be sure to cover up the holes. Be sure it's enough material not to fall inside the catalytic converter when you're covering them up. My farthest oxygen sensor's wire was trapped by a heat shield, so I just left the oxygen sensor dangling for all future steps until reinstallation. Welcome to the step that makes men out of boys and women out of girls. This step will either take you minutes if you do it right, or hours and trips to the car parts store if you do it right. Exhaust nuts and bolts are notorious for rusting and being problematic, either breaking off or being so rusty that you have to Dremel them off. I will now list tips that are helpful for removing exhaust bolts. I personally used PB Blaster. I tightened ever so slightly at first rather than loosening old rusty nuts and bolts, and then I twisted back and forth to work the rust out of the threads rather than just turning the nuts counterclockwise the whole time. This works the rust loose by bending the wrench down and under and getting it on. Next, if it's seized or rusted a little, you want to actually loosen it a little to budge it a little bit, and then you tighten it a little bit. And you budge it and tighten it. So the first step I actually did is tighten a little, loosen, tighten, loosen. Healthy dose of PB Blaster. PB Blaster helps break this lovely exhaust bolt loose. In the back, there's an exhaust bracket.
By using a short 13 to a U-joint, to a short extension, to a medium length extension, to another U-joint, to a medium length extension. You take this contraption, breaking those two bracket. You can also look at your new catalytic converter to see that there are two that you have to break free. You take your 13 on a U-joint, put it under the existing catalytic converter, get your left arm under, and you can put it onto the bolt like so. And on top of this support here, this contraption comes out onto the catalytic converter. Onto that, you can break it loose there. Let's say you break both loose. Then you put your left arm under, get that other one with the same contraption, and you're good to go. You can finish it off by hand.
At this point, we can lift the Cayenne onto jack stands at all 4 points and remove the bottom cover. We'll need enough space to climb under and disconnect exhaust pipes. We only need to remove the bottom cover under the transmission shield.
We can see the drive shaft might be in the way, so we might have to put the car neutral and disconnect it. It's easy to get to these, pre-soak these 3 bolts in PB Blaster. You can reach that one far, I'm just not filming it well. From the other side, soak the 3 of them in PB Blaster, because cylinders 4, 5, and 6 are this one on the left. Wiggle back and forth. Cool.
The trick to removing the catalytic converter for bank 2 is to twist counterclockwise while holding it and keep twisting it counterclockwise and both ways as you pull it out.
I really wish I had filmed this triumphant moment. Basically, you shimmy it back and forth, you get under the car, you push it up, you pull it down, you twist it underneath with your hand to get it unseated from these studs. Clearance is super tight here. I loosened this primary cylinders 1, 2, 3 exhaust. Turns out didn't have to do that. Taking advantage of the fact that it's on a flex pipe, play around, push it back and forth. What is up with those instructions? I tried loosening the drive shaft, putting it in neutral. No, you don't need any of that. The instructions on the forums said you have to do it this way. Take out the drive shaft. You don't have to do that. To take out the cylinders 4, 5, 6 cat. Feeling awesome right now. Triumphant. Basically, I did remove all 4 oxygen sensors. Those were in the way. One of them is dangling back there in the heat shield. All 4 oxygen sensors have to come out. Then you simply get under, push it in, pull it out, then push it in and try to get it off these studs and out this way. Then basically I bent it 180 degrees. So like this, and did a kind of maneuvering thing. I'm gonna film the insertion of the new catalytic converter. Oh, and this feels so good. Old and new.
Insert the new catalytic converter into place while it's rotated around 180 degrees. You might have to play around with the angle. The trick lies in rotating the pipe as you're inserting it, and you'll be pleasantly surprised how easily it goes in. Basically, you have to insert it from the top, get under the vehicle, pull it through on the bottom, and then while playing with its rotation, finally insert it onto the studs at the exhaust manifold. It's a lot of playing around, wiggling, and takes a little bit of time. The main thing is not to use too much force. It's advisable to replace exhaust gaskets. You'll see me shortly apply copper gasket maker and call it a day. I used gasket maker on the bottom but not the top. I've not had any issues with exhaust leaks thus far. Remember the bracket that was difficult to reach that connects the 2 catalytic converter pipes together? We reconnect that bracket between the exhaust pipes now, using the bolts we removed on a series of extensions. I tried to install 2 bolts onto it, but the Dabago aftermarket bracket didn't perfectly fit, at least for me, so I reinstalled one of the bolts and called it a day. I'm sure some OEM manual says that the car will disintegrate without 2 bolts, but all this bracket does is make sure the pipes hold onto each other and don't shake while you're driving.
But this is really sturdy on its own, and this is really sturdy on its own at the top connection at the header.
I tugged on the pipes at the top and bottom, and they're not going anywhere. At this point, we reinstall the gasket at the bottom and reconnect the exhaust pipe below. I used gasket maker applied in a thin line around the perimeter. I recommend replacing these bolts with fresh ones. At this point, we're done with underneath the Cayenne. We can reinstall the middle bottom cover and lower it. At this point, we rely on our labels for the oxygen sensors to reinstall them in the correct locations. My Bank 2 downstream sensor was dangling, so I just reinserted it back there. Since we're using a tool to remove the oxygen sensors and reinstall them, we approximate the torque, and that's between 30 and 37 foot-pounds, using the wrench so that they're snug without stripping. With the oxygen sensors reinstalled but their wires still dangling, let's reinstall the heat shield. It's good that the wires are still dangling because we'll be able to get them out of the way. Aligning the heat shield perfectly takes a little bit of trial and error. First, we loosely insert it over everything and push the clips back into place, roughly where they were, and then we might have to pull it out and adjust it left and right so that with the bracket installed, the top bolt lines up with the bolt on the engine. This took me a few tries because the bracket should be uninstalled when you're placing the heat shield. When everything is in place, we tighten the bolts, attaching the bracket to the heat shield, and also replace the top bolt with one of our extras from the exhaust. Reconnecting the oxygen sensor electrical connectors is infinitely easier than removing them, so make sure all 4 are connected, assuming you've labeled them correctly, reinsert them, and don't forget to zip tie the extra wires so that they stay out of the way. Let's reinstall the engine covers so that it's a complete installation. If everything goes according to plan, once we clear all engine codes, they never come back for the exhaust. And we can enjoy passing emissions or just an annoying check engine light finally going away.